Don't do these jokes in these days.
We are already live. Hello, everyone. Hello again. My name is Jetsa Becerna, and I welcome you to our panel discussion on automotive privacy, a differentiator or a pain in the neck. So, privacy is a fundamental right. However, integrating it effectively into automotive systems presents important challenges. So, today we will explore the balance between personalization and privacy, focusing on how data protection regulations are applied in the automotive industry and identifying some areas for improvement. Our distinguished panel will guide us through this complex topic, starting by my friend and former colleague, Mario Hoffman, our moderator, who is group leader for cyber resilience at ARC Engineering, and he brings over 20 years of experience in automotive cyber resilience and privacy. Then we also have Andrea Amico, founder and CEO of Privacy for Cars. He is a pioneer in automotive privacy tech, known for developing solutions to manage and delete personal information from vehicles. We also have Misha Rykov. He's an independent researcher based in Berlin. He has a rich background in investigative storytelling and community activism, particularly from his work with Mozilla's Privacy Not Included project. So, together we will dive into the current state of automotive personalization and privacy, examine best practices, and discuss how OEMs, tier one suppliers, and service providers can enhance data privacy through the life cycle. So, Mario, Andrea, Misha, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for this condensed but also comprehensive introduction of the panelists. So we don't need to introduce ourselves. I think we can directly jump into our topic since we have only 1 hour to discuss that a little bit in more detail. So, as Isabel said, there is kind of a conflict of interest that we perceive between, on the one hand, we have these bright and nice scenarios of individual and personalized services, mobility services in vehicles and beyond. And on the other hand, we have something weird, like what we call in Europe, the General Data Protection Regulation. We also have similar regulations in the US and many states already, also around the world. And there are things like user consent, purpose binding, and these are, let's say, these are seen as kind of roadblockers for innovative mobility services at the one hand, but on the other hand, it gives, in my opinion, kind of some kind of marks left and right. Okay, this is what personal data, personalized individual information can be used for. So I think both things are, let's say, somehow reasonable, and we try to identify the balance between it. And first question, actually, to the panelists, to set the scene a little bit, is what kind of examples do you have for this kind of personalization in modern vehicles? What are, let's say, the top 3 visions or experiences that you have already made in terms of personalization in vehicles and mobility services? So maybe Andrea first.
Sure. I think that 2 things that people will definitely have experience is that no matter how old your car, if you have Bluetooth, you will know that as soon as you step into your car will know what your phone is and will provide you hands-free, which is a life-saving technology. It also has some very dark side when it comes to privacy. The other thing you will experience that, of course, again, older vehicles, right? You can have the convenience of your home address being remembered, then your garage door codes, and what your favorite locations are, including where you drop off your kids to school. Again, there's things that have a dark side to it, all the way to some of the newest things, such as, driver monitoring. By the way, most people don't realize there's a camera staring at you because there's no red light flashing, but they're watching your habits, they're building a profile. And sometimes they may rat you out and tell your insurance company, so now it's harder to insure your vehicle.
Wait, I wanted to have some nice examples. So
Oh,
what
yeah,
would you
those
like
were the
to
nice
see? What,
ones. But those
yeah,
were the nice ones
what would
because
you
those
like to
are
enjoy?
delightful.
So,
I enjoy those things. I make a living out of it, so I enjoy those things, Mario.
yeah, I mean, for example, what I had in mind, it's like, but this is kind of visions. Yeah, having, for example, let's say a personalized parking service. So I have maybe specific demands with my car. Maybe it's pretty large, or I need some kind of charging in the parking lot or something, and I can individually then book this space. If I go downtown Munich, for example, it's actually essential to book something in advance. So this could be some of the nice scenarios, maybe. But there is, of course, a lot of implications to privacy and data protection. We come back to that. First, I would like to see what is the nice part that we would like to enjoy. So, Michael, what do you have as an experience or background or vision that you would like to share?
It's a difficult question for me because in my work I entirely focused on the negative part, on the risks, on what can go wrong. And I personally don't drive a car, so I'm a proud cyclist. But I can say that like the main use case, which is marketed as a benefit of this data driven vehicle model, is safety, and we can see that it's probably easier, to collect data and then to use it in product development, and then obviously sometimes create some features that help drivers in real time around safety. Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then I try to think of some maybe positive examples. So there's, of course, so I was working to explain the audience. I was working also with the Continental 6 years from 2016 to 2022. So I had some examples at that time, maybe health sensors measuring the blood pressure in modern driver's seats, for example, or some things that have meanwhile a legal basis, like drowsiness detection and other things where you need these kinds of sensors in the car. I also attended the in-cabin sensing conference this year in Berlin with all these innovations with the 3D cameras in the vehicle. And so actually there is a lot of innovation going on in the sense of having even more sensors. Yeah, so this is, I think, a trend that we cannot stop. But nonetheless, I mean, there are then examples I would like to enjoy in the future to have this personalized experience. I think there was actually yesterday there was a commercial from Mercedes with Antonio Banderas addressing exactly that thing, this personalization. And he drove a car that he borrowed, I think, from his wife or girlfriend or what. And then the car went to the places the girl usually goes to. Yeah, so this was kind of, he took, actually it was an identity theft, if you like. So he drove the car in let's say, on behalf of this girl. So this was kind of, okay. But anyway, so maybe we can agree that there are, let's say, nice use cases. Some of them have a kind of a specific legal basis, like e-call or like an event data recorder. So there are things which rely on personally identifiable information. But there are also, let's say, typical consumer services, let's call it that way, which need some user consent. And having said that, because this is kind of one of the terms, the terminology of regulations, I think this is, when I talk to colleagues, this is so abstract. It's like user consent management, purpose binding, transparency. What does that mean? And here again, a question to you two. maybe again refers to Andrea, because you have a lot of experience analyzing the interfaces in the infotainment system. How would you describe a typical driver, these abstract terms of the regulation?
So a few years ago, I went to a workshop that the Federal Trade Commission, which is the privacy regulator in the United States, gave to a number of dealerships. And one dealer raised their hand and said, well, can you please explain to me what is a prominent disclosure? And the person from the FTC said, I'm sorry, don't you have a 20-meter tall inflatable things that moves around and tells with giant signs and flashing light that says, come and buy my cars? Why do I need to explain this to you? And I think we're getting real cute here, right? I think there's a lot of legalese being introduced in concepts, and we're trying to make constantly things more complex and complicated than they actually are. Consent is simply this, is I'll tell you what data I'm gonna need, for what purpose. I'm gonna ask you to agree to it in ways that are simple and understandable to you. You can change your mind, and if you change your mind, that's okay. It's just simply that. The problem is that companies have taken the approach of the title of this session, right? They decided that it's a pain in the neck, or rather, it's a little bit lower than the neck. And so they said, let me give this smoking pile of difficult things and give them to my lawyers. And what the lawyers have done is that they turn this into 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 words. That's the typical number of words you need to read the privacy policies and the terms for your vehicle, which takes, by the way, typically 5 or 6 hours. And they call that, disclosures. And what is starting to happen now in the United States, and I think is going to invariably bleed over into Europe, is that regulators like the Attorney General of Texas and class action lawsuits are saying, just because you wrote it in a piece of text that nobody reasonably can understand, that is not valid. And the current talking point of the industry is, well, until somebody tells us what good is, what a good disclosure is, then, well, what are we going to do? And the thing is, you can do it better. For instance, we had over 500,000 people looking up on our free portal. It's free to consumers. We give stuff away to consumers for free all the time. You go to vehicleprivacyreport.com, you put in your VIN, and we'll tell you with a set of icons what data your car collects, where it's going, and that's simple like that. Or go and look at the excellent work that Misha and Jen have done at Mozilla and read what they say for your manufacturer. Those are much shorter text, probably not so flattering, but they're actually not hard to understand at all. It's not hard.
I would add to it that even though they're not hard to understand, like talking about my work in particular, it consists by large part of saying, I have no idea what's going on there. Yeah, so we have to identify the main problem, which is we cannot really say for sure sometimes which data is being collected, whom it's being shared with, for which purpose, with which ground. Yeah, like people then talking about a consent only in Europe by the GDPR law. Consent means affirmative action that has to be clear, that has to be freely given, and has to be informed, which is not the case in the US law, which identifies such things as opt-out consent, the concept which is against the very linguistical sense of what consent is. But then even in Europe, it's very questionable if people give consent as an informed action, right? Building up on the Andrea's point that no consumer should be expected to understand all of this information written by lawyer, which is given to them, and which, from my experience, is largely written in a way which is hiding something, right? So the status quo in privacy for cars, from my perspective, is we don't have transparency into what's going on there, and we need perhaps more regulation in a way which is not forcing manufacturers to hire more lawyers and write more text, but in a way which makes our work easier. Does it make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Maybe can we make it a little bit more tangible in the sense we talked about, personal data, examples. So let us scare the audience a little bit. So what is typical personal data a modern vehicle collects?
It can be anything. Like we saw things like genetic information. We saw things like sexual activity data and sexual data intelligence. We have no idea what that means. Anything like, and then like not only data about a car or about a driver or about passenger in the car, all the data which is taken by the sensors, which again for some reason sometimes in texting includes genetic data, but also often data of what's going on outside of the car. Yeah, so data from the cameras, data from the microphones, data from the sensors. And then finally, often the privacy policies have some text that you as a driver actually are obliged to make sure that all the passengers in your car have read and understood what the policy entails. Yeah, so that's the level of the absurd of this like legal bureaucracy that we act in now. When you buy a car, when you use it, you often sign up to explain everyone you pick up what's written there. Yeah.
Maybe there's just you need to stick a little sign at your car, at your vehicle, saying only enter that car if you have nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm.
then you are on the safe side. Andrea, what do you think? What is, let's say, the most problematic data, maybe?
Yeah, so the way we break this down into our privacy labels for cars is that we divide this into 5 categories: identifiers, geolocation, biometrics, and data collected from phones, and profiles. Profiles is, what people nowadays is cooler to call it inferences because AI is the coolest thing, right? But those are the 5 categories that we analyze privacy policies for. And the reason is because it's a mix of what is disclosed because the certain laws require to disclose them in a certain way, but also because we've done a lot of granular research with consumers on what it is that they cared about, right? And similarly, when it comes to sharing of this data, we have 5 more categories. Affiliates, which means, in the example of the manufacturer, the affiliates will be, for instance, the auto finance company, or if they have a captive insurance company like Tesla does, or their dealerships, right? So that's category number 1. But the things that consumers are typically nervous about, and that's why we disclose them, more prominently, is data brokers, the government, and insurance companies. And then, of course, you have a 5th category, which is, service providers. Say my car is compatible with Android Auto. Guess what? Your data goes to Google. And so, we also, for those cars, we also tell you, oh, by the way, your car is compatible with Android Auto. Do you want to know what Android Auto does? Right? So it's kind of a structure shaped like a tree, so that if you're a consumer, you're buying a car, because that's what the new guidance from the law is that you should know those things even before you buy a car or even before you rent a car, right? It's not okay. Today, the process is completely backwards, right? I go select a car, I buy it, I sign a lot of documents at the dealership because I spend 2 hours there already. The last thing I need is to read the privacy policies for 5 hours. Then I go home and I typically get a link from my manufacturer that says, oh, for transparent disclosures, this is where you can find all the information. It's 2 out of the typically 6 or 7 documents you actually need to read, right? And it's backwards. That's what the regulators are saying. This is not me, right? What we're trying to do and what we help dealerships do is to say, look, just like people go and get a Carfax to know if the car has been in an accident, they should go and get a privacy report to know what kind of data their car collects. In this way, when you're shopping for a car, you get a simple structure, and that's how you start to have some level of disclosure. Is it perfect? No, it's not. It's a clear trade-off between how much information you give to consumers versus how depth and detailed and tight on the legal front it is. But again, the guidance we're getting from regulators is stop asking your lawyers to make this a problem and start thinking of it as a value add. Because what I tell people often is that privacy today is where safety was a generation ago. People couldn't go to a car dealership and say, which car is the safest? They will tell you all sorts of things, probably none of them were true. Until finally, crash tests started to happen. People started to measure the roadworthiness and the safety of vehicles. And then information started to be published. And guess what happened? Shocking to nobody nowadays, but back then, shocking to all the industry members, right? People wanted safer cars, right? And just like today, guess what? People want more private cars, but the information is hard there. But if you were to actually make it there, then you start to have these positive cycles in which companies actually are incentivized to make better disclosures and to make privacy better. And that's something that benefits both the industry and consumers. Hopefully, we're not far from that day.
I mean, yeah, if you think about it, I mean, it's pretty clear. If the car is not safe, I have, of course, let's say, an obvious risk to get injured, or maybe I die. So I think this is pretty intuitive to people. So the safer the car is, the better I can handle this risk. But the risk of more or less privacy, this is so hard to explain. So also to, let's say, to explain the consequences of, let's say, modern cars generating, gathering, sending around a lot of personal data. So this is again what I said before, very abstract. So what is, let's say, do we have any kind of misuse or kind of dangerous scenarios where we say, oh, please be aware of that? I mean, Andrea, you analyze for many years already the settings, the configuration means in many different car models. Is there? I mean, there are very many worst cases, I I believe, but is there any best case?
I'm sorry, you're asking me?
Yeah, in this sense. So because
look, I have to answer. Look, if you want a list of horror stories, I mean, at the very, very top of this stuff, I think there's a growing amount of cases of domestic abuse that are absolutely revolting. There are, I mean, in the US, we know of a handful of cases of people who actually have been tracked down using the connectivity of the car and killed. So, I don't think we need to do this. I don't think we need to do the horror gallery of what can go wrong. I was just yesterday in Washington, D.C., and there was a session with one of the commissioners of Federal Trade Commission, Alvaro Badoya. And he said, he did something opposite. Instead of speaking and taking questions, he said, let me tell you what are the questions in my mind. And the first one he asked was, what is the value of privacy? Can we attach a dollar value or a euro value, since we're talking in Europe today, to that? Is it a little bit like saying that the value of marriage is the sum of the tax deductions over the years discounted by the interest rate, or is it different? And I think that those are actually some very interesting questions. I never actually thought about it this way until I heard it the other day from Commissioner Badoya. But reality is that there are laws, and Europe has very stringent laws. I think there was a session earlier pointing out that maybe those laws are not followed quite there. People here will see probably next week some news that will, about a study we just did. So I'll tell you today. We have realized that the largest data breach of GDPR comes from the automotive sector, and is absolutely, prevalent. And I think that the question is, do we need to really put a value in dollars to privacy? Do we really need to figure out, what are the most horrible things that happen? Or can we just do the simple thing, which is, why don't we follow the law?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Misha.
Yeah,
go
if
ahead.
I may, and I think this discussion has happened already. Yeah, like we did have Eric Schmidt saying a long time ago that if you want privacy, then you have something to hide, and then we saw the transformation of Alphabet, and now they're a bit more careful of what they're saying, and they have the word privacy everywhere, especially now with the new AI tools. I mean, I don't think we have to go through the same like worldview discussion, because it has happened with the tech, and people do expect some encryption when they text. Yeah, like they do want end-to-end encryption when they use it with WhatsApp. Yeah, then why don't we still not expect decent encryption on the data of our car? And by the way, as of one year ago, the only brand with which we were more or less comfortable about their encryption was Tesla out of 25 things we looked at. Not to say that Tesla is top of class, because it was like in some other things, but at least, yeah, like just a basic thing like encryption was not even talked about by most of manufacturers in the world. Why? Because yes, it is a difficult technical task, given the amount of data and like given a lot of things there, and car is not a phone. But also I think there were several studies where people are asked, okay, what are your main concerns when we talk about connected cars? And privacy was always on top of it. So people want some answers, and right now we see that people don't get those answers.
Mario, can I build on that? So, look, ultimately, my opinion does not matter. What matters is what consumers are saying and what the regulators are saying, right? And let's talk about consumers for a minute, because a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I think if you ask the average consumer on the street, what do you think about the privacy of your cars? They will look at you like you had 3 heads, right? People don't think of this car as what it actually is, which is a giant network of computers, which just so happens to take you from A to B, right? But that's really the reality that this group today on the audience really understands. But that understanding is actually starting to evolve real quick. So there's a European consultancy called SBD Automotive, and they did a study at the end of last year, before, just on the heels of the study of, the Misha participated to, but it was before the ugly stories on New York Times and, all the lawsuits. And for the very first time, when they asked consumers, what is highly important in your vehicle shopping experience, 39% of consumers said data privacy. That number was 0 a year before. And by the way, that was more important than the brand of the car. It was more important than the body style of the car. It was more important than the features of the infotainment in the car. And so if I'm an automaker, if I'm a tier one, right, because this is also the audience today, right? There's an industry side to it. I will think about that real hard, okay? Because that's when it stops being a pain in the neck and where it starts to become an opportunity. Because right now, the industry is in absolute disarray. Profitability is crashing. There's a wave of imports from China that is further going to crash it. There was a study just done last week that says that the stock price of automotive companies in Europe is at a 60% discount versus the industrial index. So investors are losing faith in automotive companies, all while consumers are saying 80% of consumers plus are saying that they don't trust the manufacturer with their data. That's the situation today. A different way of looking at it is to say there's a 1 in 4 consumers that are shopping for cars, looking for something right now, nobody's giving to them. And that, as a former McKinsey, screams opportunity to me. It is just like when back cars were not particularly safe, and Volvo said, you know what, we're going to put seatbelts in every single car. Oh, by the way, we're going to install airbags in every car. And a tiny company out of Sweden built a massive brand and grew sales and became extremely successful. And I am sincerely hoping that somebody today will take this message to heart and start to think about what are the 15 connected car projects we're working on that we can kill tomorrow morning, because the ability to monetize them and to comply with the law are basically zero, and they will be harder and harder as time passes. And why don't we focus on simplifying things, produce a product that is privacy friendly, and tell consumers, you want a private car, buy mine. You want to be spied on, buy everybody else's. And that's, by the way, what Apple did 10 years ago.
Yeah, actually, this was always my dream, that this can be part of the marketing story. Yeah, that so that people who have the power to really make that popular, so that that privacy is kind of a part of the decision making when buying a new car. I love that idea, but honestly, if I talk to manufacturers, typically I take the consumer completely out of the equation. But now, good that we have, let's say, at least some studies supporting that demand or feeling that I would like to have this kind of data protection privacy in cars. But typically, I say, hey, and just assume I am the only one in the world who would like to have the choice. There's a regulation, and the regulation gives you some indicators what you need to address. And if you don't address it, there's a risk. There's some risk, and I mean the big IT companies, they have already sanctions like 3-digit million numbers or even more than a billion, and so this is no longer pocket money for these guys. So, and I think the automotive domain as such is also facing a risk, a rising, increasing risk here in that direction. So this is what I typically try to address when I talk to OEMs or tier ones. So to what extent they would like to address and how to address the privacy part. So in this sense, but I also wanted to ask, because we were talking about studies, I would like to ask Misha, since you were part of the Mozilla study last year, I think many people have read that. I think it was 25 models in total, and none of them got any privacy label. So what were the highlights or lowlights in that study?
Yeah, indeed, this were 25 labels, 25 brands. None of them so all of them received the privacy not included label in that study. Yeah, so it means that like it was not vouched for. And some statistics in that study were that 84% as of 1 year ago were sharing personal data, and 76% were selling your personal data in some way. Of course, it mainly means targeted advertisement. So the way the sale of data is being defined, for example, by CCPI, by the CCPA, but this is still an alarming rate. And another thing in privacy in terms of sharing is sharing of data with government or law enforcement, which 56% of car manufacturers would happen with as easy thing as informal request. Yeah, so like in Europe, we know that you need a court order to get data from your car. In the US, not always so, with around 1.5 of them. And here's where we come back to the example of Apple, actually, which was like in this like official fight back in the days. I think it was 2017 over giving access to FBI over a phone. And it's something where, yeah, whether marketing strategy of being privacy friendly kicked off, because the whole world was saying how they are like how they are fighting like someone larger than them over a privacy of one bad guy. But it also creates some like a lot of these ethical discussions that are outside of the purely marketing domain. So I would say that it would be a great idea to merge marketing strategy and like a sale opportunity and data protection. But as we saw in big tech, like it's really a big challenge. Coming back to the research, I think another important thing I wanted to label is that almost none gave controls to consumers over their personal data that we would think are sufficient. And that's an answer mainly to the very simple questions. Can you just delete data from your account? And for 92%, that was not the case.
What were the reactions or the impact? Was it like, so, oh yeah, you're right, we are sorry, we update our system and make it more compliant, or what was it?
No, actually, car manufacturers didn't seem to do much. They mostly ignored it, as well as they mostly ignored the subsequent requests from, for example, Senator Market Office in the US, and then FTC's requests. They just hire lawyers and they hide from it. But at the same time, we see that there is an alliance of car manufacturers which is saying that, like, we all sat here and we agreed that privacy is important, and it means ABC, like encryption, vulnerability disclosures, and so on. And it's funny how we see how these same principles that they themselves manifest and write on their meetings are not being met. So with this, the implications that I was doing is that they are perfectly aware themselves of the situation, and they have strategy already in place for the cases when someone calls them out on it. Such as, I will give just one example. Like Mercedes would say that, yeah, like encryption, we cannot really say if the encryption like exists both at rest and at the transit, because it's a very complex question, and there are a lot of things going on. That so like sometimes encryption is there, sometimes it's not there, but like we cannot go into details here. Yeah, so like we know that encryption is a big question, but we also see that we don't have answers if it exists, and where and why and how.
Okay, thanks. I just looked at our timing. It's let's say 15 minutes before the end. I think Jezebel, are there any questions already from the audience that we could take?
Yes, we have a number of questions. I will check first the ones that have been upvoted and show them on this stage. All right. And for whatever reason, I'm not visible. Okay.
Now you are.
There you go. All right. So, how does privacy between a user and the manufacturer when a user is buying a second-hand car? Is the seller expected to tell the manufacturer and then pass on the information to the new buyer?
Gosh, can I take this one for a minute? Okay, so this is heartbreaking to me all the time. Okay, so let's start with the simple stuff, right? Your car essentially is first and foremost like a portable hard drive on wheel, like a USB drive that has the data of the old owner. We now know that, and again, we're going to be publishing this study next week, that when you pass it out to the next person, the controller is the only entity that has the legal obligation, not optional, the legal obligation to delete this data. Okay? So that means if you're a dealership, dear dealership, you must delete the data of prior consumers. If you're a rental company, dear rental company, you must delete the data of people after they finish to rent the car before you give it to somebody else. And this is just not happening, guys and ladies. It's just not happening. And again, we ran a little bit of math on how big of an exposure it is if you count 4% of global revenue. I started to lose the count when I passed 100 billion euros. So that's just the most basic level, okay? Let's clean up devices. Just like you have a device management policy that covers your phone and your laptop, you should cover your car because it's the same damn thing. When you get into the newer world of cars with connected services, it's even worse, even worse. I actually encourage people in the audience, if you have sold your car in the last 2 or 3 years, and you had decided to use the mobile app that came with your car, I encourage you right now to log in and see if you can see where the car is, unlock it, start it, and if you have some cars, you have access to remote cameras, and please put in the chat if you're succeeding in doing this, because I promise you, many of you are. Many of you are, okay? And again, the law is pretty darn clear. It is not the job of consumers. It is not the job of consumers. And if companies don't have processes to handle this, that is highly, highly, highly problematic, especially in a world in which we have to take phone calls and emails from survivors of abuse that are telling me my ex-spouse is tracking me down with my car, and we pick up the phone and we talk with the manufacturers. In many cases, they help. In many cases, they don't. And I think if you cannot solve problems when you have a real life emergency for people, what are the chances this is going to happen to you as a consumer? And if we cannot focus on solving that, we're focusing on the wrong things. Let's stop focusing on how do we sell heated seat for $15 a month, please. Let's make some real difference on real people's life.
All right, thank you very much, Andrea. I will show the next question on the stage. There are 2 questions that are closely related, so I will show both of them. The first one is, how can automakers implement transparent and ethical policies for long-term vehicle data retention, especially considering scenarios like change in vehicles ownership or lease terminations? And there is a follow-up question on the same. I now check it in continuation with my question above. Should automotive regulations require manufacturers to implement a comprehensive factory reset function in vehicles similar to those found in smartphones to be used before transferring ownership? And important, just to add from my side, not only that have the factory reset function, but that the user can find it. Yeah.
I'm happy to take it just because this is the core of what we do. But Misha or Mario, if you guys want to respond, that's fine too.
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, There are actually, believe it or not, let's have an uplifting message. There are hundreds of companies that actually do this, okay, including the auto finance companies of many manufacturers. GM Financial, Toyota Financial, Honda Financial, and so on and so forth. They actually have policies that when a vehicle lands under ownership, they take responsibility over getting rid of the data of the prior owners. Here's the good news. The bad news, they do this in the US and in Canada. I am not aware of anybody having a policy in Europe. And literally, that's all it takes, guys. It takes somebody to write a piece of paper and put their signature saying, this is our policy. And this is not a technical challenge at all, okay? And so yes, it's a real problem, and it's solvable in about 5 minutes. This is a will problem, it's not a skill problem.
You would like
simple
to add
answer.
anything? Yeah.
Simple answer to the second question is yes, of course.
Yes.
They should have. Where's the problem?
Yeah. All right, so I'll go to the next question. When did manufacturers start gathering data aggressively? I tell people if they want a vehicle that doesn't track their data, they should get one all enough that it has hydraulic power steering. What is the proper answer to these queries?
Yeah, or they should maybe just bike or use a skate.
Well, if it's an e-bike.
It's from what I saw, all of this aggressive data things started around the same time as when Tesla started to skyrocket and to impress investors, and other car manufacturers, especially those in Europe, became scared, and they tried to copy the model. And funnily, it looks like the policy lets put a lot of sensors and collect as much data as we can, also from dealers and others. This came before the actual reasoning of, okay, but what will we do with all of that data? I don't know, what is your opinion on Andrea? Like, do you think they have already like a strategy in place how they will increase sales with all of this?
I used to work for McKinsey, so I don't mind speaking ill of my people, okay? So what really happened is that sometimes around 2016, 17, 18, management consulting companies like McKinsey went to automotive companies and said, oh my gosh, you're sitting on this pile of data, why can't you monetize it? Because back then, the two businesses that people were looking at as the model for how you are successful in the stock market were Tesla, as Misha pointed out, and Facebook. So what we're living today is the fact that cars have been engineered to be like Facebook. And I think we can all agree that we're sitting today in 2024, and maybe Facebook ain't so hot anymore, okay? But that's what happened. And you know, I went to conferences for many years, and I still do. Like, you know, 3 months ago I was at a conference, and still today, people in the corridors, when they're talking to manufacturers, the number one question that I hear is, what additional data points can you bring me? And privacy, again, has never entered the realm of the discussion because it is seen as a pain in the neck. And I think that the sooner we realize it's not a pain in the neck, but it is an opportunity, that day is not coming fast enough. Because truly, I think that companies can make a lot of money, garner a lot of market share, be extremely successful. By the way, there is one area where Chinese entrants cannot compete by design, because every data that is collected by those companies goes into servers hosted in China, and by law, the Chinese government has access to those. And so in a world in which Uber was fined 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, 250 million euros or something like that over data transfer, that is one massive barrier to entry. That lasts way longer than tariffs and trying to, do any of the other things that companies are trying to do right now. So again, I think that the sooner companies will realize this is a competitive force for good, and doing good and doing well at the same time, I think it should be the apex of any business that exists on earth. If you can do both, you should go to sleep and sleep real well.
Yeah. I think you raised a very important point here, in the sense that most of the risks or impacts are only, let's say, 5 or 10 years from now. I believe, but correct me if I'm wrong or too naive, when it started, let's say 10 years back, I think my car is now 13 years old, but also has some synchronization with mobile phone. There was already some internet connectivity, and actually, I don't know what kind of data it gathers, but I think it started like, oh well, better we collect that data. We never know for what it can be good for. Or maybe future business cases can benefit from it. And this is, of course, this sounds like Wild West. So I think it's good that we have regulation. And maybe I would like to use the last couple of minutes, maybe 5-6 minutes are left, to have a little outlook. So you said already that it should be kind of the marketing strategy. Yeah, so this could, let's say, improve or a little bit into the direction that we have more privacy, more data protection features in cars, maybe also, let's say, more user-friendly interfaces in the infotainment system, because this is my central point of how I can configure things. And I think my dream is just make it part of the homologation, like security, because then there's no escape.
Misha, you want to go first?
Yeah, so the first wonderful step would be talking about US would be federal privacy law, because like a colleague of mine tried to delete data on her, and she asked about it, and they said, are you in California? No, then sorry, like we will just not do it at all. Talking about Europe, the law is there. Like the law is actually nicely written but the institutions that are created and that exist to make sure that the law is functioning are slow, bureaucratic, and it seems like they are mostly more busy with the big tech than with car manufacturers. And partly the irony here that, like, if they would really go after the latter, they would have to harm their own, like, native European main industries, as opposed to big tech, in which like European institutions are just writing big fines for someone who is overseas. Yeah, and so that's the case right now.
Let me add my 2 cents. I'll echo some of the things that Misha said without repeating them. But in Europe, there's no need for new laws. I see a lot of things in the chat with, what laws do we need to pass? None. This is not a problem of passing more laws. Is to start to do what the law says. That's a very different problem that we have. And right now, the task of meeting that bar is being put into 2 wrong buckets. One is giving it to the lawyers to write more and more things into the agreements and contracts. That does not bring really any relief to consumers whatsoever. And by the way, many of those restrictions are probably not true under the law. For instance, if you read your rental car agreement, it will tell you you're responsible to delete your own data. That's not true. That's not what the law says. They can write it, but it's not true. In fact, we spoke with lawyers who tell us, yeah, just by writing in there, that's probably a deceptive, language in there. So don't do that. The other wrong place in which this is being put is in technology. I hear a lot of myths, I don't know how else to describe them, about which companies are better at privacy because they've designed some menu buried 5 levels deep into the infotainment system where you actually are given some controls and whatsoever. And reality is that every time I drive a car in Europe, I have these, there's more pop-ups than in cars, the same cars in the United States, but they are all deceptive patterns, right? They're all, well, do you want to turn on the car? Then click OK, or your infotainment doesn't work. That's not freely given consent under the law. And so again, I think that what is happening is that the lawyers and the technologists are getting together and trying to figure out, how do I change this little menu to protect myself, as opposed to what is the experience that consumers want? Because I can tell you, today in the United States, statistic from 2 months ago, 1 out of 7 consumers is saying they are buying their second choice vehicle out of data privacy concerns. And again, once you start to see people moving dollars, I think that's when companies will start to get that they need to do something differently.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have 3-4 minutes left. So I think this sounds like a final round for some last words from each of us. So Misha, what is on your roadmap maybe for the next month? How would you like to promote this topic further?
Yeah, so what I would love to see is the conversation going on, like it's going on here. So more attention from the regulators, more letters to them, more class lawsuits, more noise, and then something will happen out of it. What do you think, Andrea?
Oh boy. So Tuesday, look for, put privacy for cars in your news alerts, and you'll start to see news about a report that we'll be releasing on Tuesday, which contains a legal analysis from a King's Counsel. This is the highest level of expertise on privacy you can find in the UK legal system, which details all the ways in which certain obligations of the law are not being met currently by the industry. So we expect that we're going to get some attention out of it, hopefully, and some change, because again, change all required is a signature on a piece of paper on let's change our policy. 2 is we keep expanding vehicle privacy report, both in depth, but also geographically. So we're going to bring it to Australia before the end of the year. It's already available in the UK and Europe. But we're going to keep increasing depth. Hopefully, multiple languages support is not too far down the pipe in 2025. And then I'm working on a cool project called the Disconnected Car, and which is exactly the opposite of the connected car. And we're having a lot of highly frustrating fun with it. And if people want to learn more, if you are a tier 1 or a manufacturer, I think, again, there's a great opportunity to do the right thing and position yourself as the best actor and why people should be choosing your product as opposed to somebody else. So yeah, that's what I'm working on.
Cool. Okay, so I'm looking forward to get the outcome of this and then continue the discussion. I think in my personal opinion, so this is certainly not the opinion of my company, but I would like to see a 1 billion fine on Tesla's table soon, so that the complete topic of privacy in cars gets some momentum and some budgets in the companies who are responsible. So with this, I would like to hand over to Jezebel, to our host.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for this great discussion. I hope the audience will give you an applause with the emojis. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise and your opinions. I would like to know if any of you will be available at the launch for further discussions. I mean, there were still a couple of questions there from people that are very interested in the topic. Would you be available after this session at the launch?
Yeah, how can I enter
for
that?
a little bit, yes.
Yeah, so you have to then I will end the session because another one needs to start, and
Yeah.
I let you know how to get to the launch. So thank
Okay.
you very much for your attention and for your participation.
Can you save all the comments, because there are so many good comments that we haven't reflected yet?
Yes, one moment. I need to finish the session.
Yeah.
All right.